I heard this at a recent event that you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI.
They keep telling us that it's all over for HR. The age of AI is upon us, and that means HR should be prepared to be decimated. We reject that message. The future of HR won't be handed to us. Instead, it'll be defined by those ready to experiment, adopt, and adapt. Future-Proof HR invites these builders to share what they're trying, how it's going, what they've learned, and what's next. We are committed to arming HR with the AI insights to not just survive, but to thrive. Welcome to Future-Proof HR podcast, where we explore how forward-thinking HR leaders are preparing for disruption and redefining what it means to lead people in a changing world. Today's guest is Adam McCoy, VP of HR at DMC Global Inc., a 20-plus year global HR leader across manufacturing, supply chain, financial services, aviation, and tech. Adam focuses on aligning HR strategy to business imperatives while elevating employee experience. He also serves as Colorado SHRM State Director, where he recently helped convene the state's first AI-focused HR conference. So a lot for us to talk about. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Excited for the conversation.
So I'd love to talk about AI, but before that, I want to play back a quote that you told me last time we chatted, which is that you're not running into the CEO's office anytime soon asking for a lot of headcount within the HR function, with or without a recession on deck.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
I think that with just the state of, you're right, the economy set aside, I think that we're in a place where there are so many exceptional tools coming out every single day that we actually are able to find ways to work smarter, to work, I think, frankly, to, in many ways, end up with a better product and not need necessarily all of the headcount that it might have taken historically. When you think about developing something simple like a job description or a comp plan or a PowerPoint deck, those things would have taken a lot of time. And when you're a leader, you probably want to save your time for what's most valuable. And perhaps you need to be maybe in the approval process, but maybe you would have spent a lot of time designing it. Well, now everyone can do it. Those folks, of course, that stay AI literate, right? And I think that's the imperative.
Okay, so I said we're not going to talk about AI with this question, but actually, so it sounds like that is like really like what's on your mind. In addition, I don't know, there's a kind of uncertainty, arguably, in the macroeconomic situation.
I think
There's more to it.
I think that's definitely right. And certainly in our industry, in some of the industries that our companies and my company's involved with are experiencing some volatility. I mean, I think like a lot of companies are, right? And I also don't know that it makes a lot of sense to go out recruiting a bunch of folks at the moment when the whole sort of larger economic climate is a little bit unsettled, right? So I think it is about figuring out what you can do with what you have and how do we challenge and keep our staff ahead to meet this demand. But you're right, I wouldn't be going into the corner office as to ask for significant incremental headcount unless it was something project-based or something. But otherwise, I don't think based on economics, based on industry, I think there's a number of things that cause that conversation to be where it's at.
You're very engaged in local HR community, and you're talking to your fellow CHROs all the time. What are the themes that have emerged in 2025, much more so than in years past for you?
I think people used to feel like AI was something fairly nebulous. Yes, we need to do AI because we need to do AI. Because, of course, why wouldn't we want to do AI? Because everyone's talking about AI and it's on the front page of every newspaper and blah, blah, blah. But I think that for me, some of the learnings that I've had from a couple of groups is some of the things that we think about as probably most capable in an AI setting. What are some of the things I just said, like in recruiting or in the creation of basic policies and communications and those things? And sure, but I was really excited and intrigued to hear about what some of the larger companies are up to with how they're using AI to really help streamline their employee experience, in a couple cases, their customer experience. And while I suppose one could wonder about all of the kind of the tentacles of those actions. I think that it feels almost, it's cliche, I suppose, but almost limitless, like where we can go. We just need to make sure we can, as they say, keep the robots from rising up. But I feel like most HR leaders are having some pretty intense conversations internally, whether they own the AI strategy or not, but certainly how it impacts employees. Companies that aren't taking a hard look at it, I think, are missing the boat. There's leakage, right? They may think, oh, we don't use AI, whatever, but they are. And I think that's what a lot of CHROs are trying to not only figure out the what, the why, the how, and some companies are definitely farther along than others.
So you said something interesting there, which is that depending on the company, you might have a different role in HR with relation to how the organization will proceed forward with AI. Tell me more about that. And also, if you think, in your view, like an ideal role that the HR department plays in a movement of the entire organization towards being, let's say, more AI fluent, native, adoptive, et cetera.
I think that some organizations probably will rely on their IT functions, perhaps, to to either set the strategy or to at least set the framework, put the guardrails up. And I think that's most companies are grappling with what does that mean for us? But I think for HR, to me, the things that hit my mind are how do I ensure the employees know what they should be using, how to use it, right? Because I think that there's so many tools that are out there that are just deployed as part of our operating systems these days, right? That people could just go to the races. And how can I help make sure not only we're using it for the right things, but also that they're having a good experience too? And so I think about things like training. I think about things like partnering with the business. So I even understand what's the business hoping to do with AI? How can I support that? Because obviously, as we recruit and people turn over, how do I help make sure that the recruiting strategy meets their needs around AI? I think HR will certainly play a significant role in the continued evolution of AI in the workplace.
Absolutely. So there's like the training and also around both the foundational skills, let's call it, around how to engage with these tools because it's a generational shift, right? But then on top of that, the specific tools that an organization is using, ensuring that you're partnering with the business to ensure there's a good experience and outcomes there. But then also you're talking about how it maps into the recruiting funnel.
Right.
Because that's another interesting shift, right? I feel like it's commonly told that if you're just generally looking for a job as a knowledge worker, go sharpen your AI skills somehow, and that should like somehow help you. From a recruiting perspective, do you think that's starting to permeate into the job descriptions or just the requirements, right?
Yeah.
Across the board and across industries and across roles as being relevant and useful?
I think it is definitely starting to permeate across many facets of the recruiting experience, the whole talent acquisition process. I think that certainly as a recruiter, using these tools to not only help prepare the most dynamic posting, the phraseology that will get people's attention. And I think that there's so much to consume out there, right? So how do we use the tool to help us cut through the noise? Sure, that's one thing. And I think we'll have a long shelf life. But I also feel like in talking with, again, some other, my recruiting colleagues, I think there's maybe some growing concern because the applicant pool has become so sharp, as you said. People are now using these tools exceptionally well, frankly. And when I think about HR's role to help maybe screen through candidates, to hand off a slate of candidates we think is the best, right, to the hiring authority, how does that change? I have probably friends in my network that are probably embellishing, right, their skill set, right, because the tools let them do that, so they fit through the funnel, right? And I guess kudos for using technology, right? But I wonder about, you can almost start to see it in some resumes, like when you like really take a close look, like the phraseology, it almost is, I don't know, my grammar school teacher would probably say I wasn't the best grammarian, but you can see in some language, like, wow, that's fascinating word choice. It makes me wonder what was behind that, right? I think something like, as you said, like the recruiting process is the tip of the spear, right? And that's one way that we as HR professionals are going to help build more successful businesses, right? Is we want to attract and retain the brightest and most capable talent. And if this can help us do, that's great. I hope that people are using it judiciously.
Yeah, so you went in a very fascinating direction, which I want to come back to in 1 second. But I'm curious first, from the approach of the job description itself, is a line item like AI fluent or like able to, whether in marketing or in sales or in operations or HR,
Yep.
whatever the function across every function, are you starting to see the business demand, hey, some kind of AI literacy or fluency or showing that you've done a project or done
Yeah.
something? And is that permeating kind of the requirements of like more and more roles? That's really, I want to get at that first before we come to the actual recruitment side of it, because from the talent acquisition team's perspective, there's a fascinating story you're starting to get into there. But if we think all jobs are shifting, are we starting to see that because the new jobs that are going out there are starting to evolve to need AI to just get a new job?
I think that's definitely true. I've seen it certainly in more and more job descriptions. Whether it makes the final job description, it's certainly a requirement in talking to a hiring authority. They may use a specific type of tool or a specific platform that they want to make sure you have advanced experience in Copilot Pro or ChatGPT version XXX, right? Not only fluency in the tool, but also to your point, have you done advanced modeling using this kind of tool for this kind of outcome? And I think that will continue to be out there. And as I think about it from a candidate perspective, and frankly, just as an employee, I think that scares some people, right? And I think that, again, it's cliche that people say, oh, I have to adapt, I have to change. It's real. I think
Yeah.
that's absolutely true. But yes, I think to spin around to the top, I do see it continuing to permeate job requirements. And I expect we will be soon getting to a place where you will have to demonstrate your fluency.
And to that point, it's only escalating, right? So it's just, hey, you can have a 1 minute conversation about AI because you used it for a recipe. Okay, great. That means that you have some basic mindset towards agility or like curiosity that we've established. Okay, great. Let's move you forward. But maybe depending on the job and the industry and the function, it'll be much more stringent, right? Show me how, or there's like a take home project for certain roles, which is literally leveraging certain like AI. So yeah, I can see that escalating. So I'd love to circle back to the really important point that you made, which is I think of it almost there's like a war going on. To let's go cliche, like the talent war
Sure.
almost. And what's interesting at this point is the usual profiteers in war are selling to both sides in this case. So the candidates are, yeah, there's tools out there for candidates to like quickly do all types of crazy stuff to just get in the door. And they're fighting AI bots and all types of things that recruiting teams are putting in place to get more efficient. And you like, get into this whole new level of the shell game, right? If you want to keep using this war metaphor, but either way, it's certainly changing. As you're like working with the recruiting team, how do you think about the guidelines? Or you mentioned in some cases, maybe things might be going overboard on either side, right?
Yeah.
How do you think about the guidelines that you said, like even like with your own recruiting practices, right? Because there's probably a tool that you can take to eliminate any human interaction through the entire offer accept, all the way to offer accept process if you
Yep.
wanted to. We're not exactly doing that, but yeah, have you thought about the guidelines or the guardrails?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the crazy part I would say is that just your comment 4 seconds ago, one of these CHROs that was in the luncheon I was at just recently here, they are doing that. The people apply through their ATS, right? And the AI evaluates their candidacy, flips them back beautifully written responses. It feels absolutely human through to a phone screen that actually it is done by AI. It sounds perfectly human. It helps craft the offer. And essentially based on all of those things, it makes a decision and passes that to a recruiter who actually then reviews everything and makes sure that this seems reasonable. That feels what a marvel of efficiency, right? But I think the other thing that HR folks are struggling with, and I think our friends in the legal department are struggling with, are we've trained people over the years, hiring managers and HR professionals, to keep the hiring process as unbiased as possible, thinking about discriminatory factors, those kinds of things that can creep in, and we do our best to guard against that. How do we know that process that I just described was on guard against that. And I'm sure someone's going to say to me, Adam, you teach the machine. Well, okay, I get that. That makes sense. But as humans evolve, I don't know if it's quite that easy for it to always be making the best choice. And so I worry about some of the screening tools that I know so a lot of the recruiters rely on now, because I think, again, the state of the economy, there's a lot of people in the job market, right? And so I don't fault a recruiter for using these tools. They have to just get their job done, right? But I think it's making sure that we have calibrated these tools to do what we need them to do in a set aside the legality, because I know that's shifting around on a lot of these kinds of things, but
Right.
what we should stand for, right, as HR professionals. And so I think that's definitely an ongoing conversation among HR leaders is, do we feel confident in these tools? I think people are feeling more confident as the tools evolve, but I don't know that I'm ready to have that whole process be managed by AI. I think there are components of it that can and should be, but I think it's the TA process that HR professionals think about when they think of AI, I think, for the most part, right? Because there's other things, having it handle employee relations, those kinds of things, it's going to be incredibly difficult for it to figure that out. But it's repetitive. The TA process is repetitive, right?
Yeah.
It's a great use case, right? I think
Combine that with immense amount of volume and employer bargaining power at the moment with the labor market.
that's right.
And it's just like this formula to, let's just say, push the law to catch up, right?
Okay.
The efficiency. Yeah, I'd like to think that the other kind of downstream impact of this is imagine a market where it is a little bit more even, right? Like if we're headed back to in certain sectors, 2022 or 2021, 23, where it's very tight.
Right.
Think about the candidate experience and for top talent that just feels I don't want to deal with this bot or
Right.
people leaving, getting out of these funnels because they just feel like it's disabusing them of their humanity and they can do better. That's a potential downstream effect I can see as well. And it seems like the industries where this kind of mass automation and talent acquisition is most used is where that balance is completely shifted in favor of the employer. And there's, let's just go as far as we can. But the moment, I guess markets are brutal, right? The moment you're not able to successfully get a high conversion rate of talent, there's going to be pushback on that. And that's even separate from both the ethical and legal constraints that you mentioned. Let's talk also about some other use cases, right? Everyone has different ways that they've come at AI use cases, like both personally and maybe the first time in the work world. Tell me about a little bit about yours. Like, what was the first time you found it adding value in one of your like workflows?
One of the things that I've used it for recently and used it, I think, fairly successfully was the creation of a pretty comprehensive training curriculum for what I might call kind of leadership 101, right? So for folks that are new to leadership, the foundations of why do you need to be a leader all the way through to how do you have a difficult conversation, right? And a colleague of mine in my SHRM network here in Colorado also was talking with me about how she had done something like this. And so I think I had to learn a little bit, right? I want to make sure I'm using the right cues, right? Or the right prompts, as they say, right? I want you to build this with this long, with 3 exercises, 2 handouts, a graphic, and a whatever, right? And I was amazed at generally the output. And through to the speaker's notes, it helped me actually focus more on the conversations in the room, which I feel like that's where I'm adding the value. Putting the words on a screen, it's important because, of course, they're staring at it. We're all staring at it. But the fact that I could focus and hear and really listen, right? Because I had the notes right in front of me. I didn't have to worry about losing my place, those kinds of things, if I was listening intently to the room and come back to the curriculum. But I thought it was successful. It's something that I've talked to a few of my peers about, and we've been kind of exchanging some experiences and what those products actually looked like. Oh, what tool did you do yours in? Yours has some cool whatever, right? And
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, getting back to your top question, it
Mm.
saved me time. And in this era of, I think, not resources just everywhere, it served its purpose very well. I was very pleased. I think the attendees were pleased. And I would do it again.
This has been a fantastic conversation so far. If you haven't already done so, make sure to join our community. We're building a network of the most forward-thinking HR and people operations professionals who are defining the future. I will personally be sharing news and ideas around how we can all thrive in the age of AI. You can find it at gocleary.com/Cleary-community. Now back to the show. So if you did not have access to these tools, like if you're doing this and we're in 2021,
Yep.
would it have been that you just wouldn't have done the training to begin with? Or you would have had the same amount of time to do the training, but then you would have gotten feeling way less confident and prepared and probably not as great of an outcome? Or another way to look at it, would you actually have had an intern or more access to resources back then where they would have actually,
Yes.
you would have gone back and forth with them to get it done?
I think I would have been less likely to commit to the training, number one, because just even the process of coming up with the words that you would have ordinarily used in 2019 or 2020, right?
Yeah.
It's an art, right? And obviously the AI is helping us with that art. It's not a replacement, but it's a helper. And if I had not had that, I would not have been able to become as prepared as I was in the timeline I needed to become as prepared in. So the alternative would have been two of them in my mind. Either we didn't do the training or we hired a consultant to come in and do it. And that has its own pluses and minuses, of course, both of them. And we've gone down those roads before. All of us have in HR, I'm sure. But the fact that we can speak the language of the business where we're in, a consultant doesn't have to get up to speed.
Yeah.
There's just a lot that I think can make this quite a story at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Thanks for going through that. And then another kind of topic I wanted to get your thoughts on was just enabling the enterprise more broadly, right? So with AI, have you guys gone like wall to wall? Every employee has access to some kind of LLM and go in, and I'm just curious, like where you are in enabling the entire organization and how that process has been working.
We are in the midst, I would say. So there are a couple of tools that are currently out there. And I think because we've had some experience with them now over time, I think we will be, like a lot of organizations that I've heard from, are probably going to be tailoring to probably one or two choices for the generals, so for the wider employee population. There could be scenarios where, say, in finance or actuarial needs, where an even more powerful, more advanced tool might be needed, and that's great. I think for the vast majority of employees, we will be, for example, rolling out a policy that guides the responsible use of AI technology and what kind of technology we will want people to use, because I worry that companies that haven't addressed that, there's data being leaked, right? And they're not aware, or they don't want to deal with it, or they think it's insignificant. And that's pretty important to me. I think that as HR professionals, someone could say, that's IT security's issue. That's the general counsel's issue. I don't see it that way. I think that this is a process where it's going to take all of us to help shape the use of technology in our own environments. And I think that's a critical role for HR to play.
Yeah, I agree. And it should be, once you align on that, it should be a part of the training for every new employee that comes in. So you're maintaining that standard once you created it. And who's going to take that on but the HR team, and to ensure that's ongoing. You created this floor of understanding around like data use. Like, in fact, that's like the most basic thing. I feel like when I hear HR leaders say, like, you have folks who are just trying to look away and say, this is not for me, or maybe for other companies, doesn't matter in my industry. But what are the chances that some employee somewhere within the organization isn't using some sort of AI tool for some part of their process? It's like almost nil for almost every company at this point. And so at the very least, you need to have something to address how we're going to allow it. Even if what you're saying is, yeah, we don't care about AI and we don't want any adoption and don't use it, or you're not allowed to use it. And if you do it, it's of your own kind of volition, but we'll sue you if you take company data offline, but you got to address it in some kind of format, right?
Right. I think that either of those scenarios, I think, are not going to be the winning scenario, right? We're just going to ignore it. We're going to pretend it's not happening. That's just reckless. And I think we're going to forbid it, I think, is also not contemporary, right? This tool is here. It's impacting every part of your life. You go onto Amazon it's making AI recommendations on that new pair of shoes that it thinks you should get. I think it really is about helping think through what are the guardrails, right? Because I believe in the goodness of people, right? And I'm sure that employee that wanted to do an analysis of some sales forecast or something,
Data.
right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
threw it into their tool and it came back beautifully. They got what they wanted, but that's now.
Yeah.
So I worry about that. Yeah. But organizations are tackling it and we are too.
Yeah. Let's talk some more about talent acquisition again. One nuance is about like field roles and manufacturing roles, right? I know that that's like the sector like a lot of your portfolio leans towards. Do you think the AI tools will have differing impacts for different types of industries from a recruiting efficacy kind of standpoint? Or how do you think about it that in your sector without breaking trust with candidates in the recruiting process to leverage AI?
I think that it will vary, I think, based on sector. I think that some sectors, I think that some parts of work that are going to be either incredibly more manual, I think there will be different kinds of requirements that will continue to be baked in that may not lean as heavily towards these things, right? But I think that as you move along in your career, I think that even if you started in a manufacturing role, right? Like it's going to become more and more of a reality as time goes on. And even if today it's limited, perhaps, I think in 12 months it's going to look different. And in 12 more months, it's going to look even more different. I think keeping an eye to that candidate experience and that employee experience and adapting that a bit, I think based on the environment you operate in, I think is appropriate and I think would be more smart. Yeah.
At the top, we were talking about doing more with less or just having less in terms of resources. You got to like really clarify what you can and cannot work on, or maybe you can do more or just as much because of AI tools out there. But the reality is there's some prioritization mechanics I think every CHRO is going through in the year. Has your thinking on that evolved at all or on how you would prioritize just programming, just resources like within the HR team for this era?
I
Any golden rules or even or all the way down to specific things that you feel are just relevant for you?
I feel like it's conversations that I've had with my team about how they use it. What do they need to use it more effectively? The industry they're sitting in, what do they see as the sort of next use case in their function of HR? And so I want to be able to help, and I think any CHRO would want to be able to help bridge that, right? And figure out, okay, even if I don't know it, which is entirely possible, right? Well, let's go find it. Let's go find the person that can help us better understand this. I think it all does. We're working smart. We're focusing on the right value-added activities. And if it's a new module of an existing AI tool that we need to consider or a bolt-on to one of our other pieces of HR technology, I think we have to be open-minded to what people need. And I think it will be different based on not only their role within HR, but I think also their acumen with the tools.
So now we're getting a little bit into this already. HR reskilling or skilling and reskilling within the HR function and across all of the disciplines like within it. Love to get your thoughts. Is what's going to be really ascendant? Like what kind of skill sets are going to be really important for a great future-proof HR department?
I think it's going to be critically around these kinds of conversations, being someone who continues to lean in. I think that it would be easy for some people to think this tool is going to take my job. I heard this at a recent event that you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI. I feel like helping to ensure that you remain literate. You think across the HR profession, there are a lot of things that we do, like a lot of fields, that to stay current, right? Understanding what's changing in the regulatory climate, what's changing at the local level, et cetera. I think this is another one of those things that will be essential to stay fresh, because what we use it for today, we're going to use it for something different tomorrow. And if you aren't ready to adopt that, then that could be a challenge. And I think it's not being afraid. I think it's really embracing the tools.
It's interesting you say that because you're giving it the same level as knowing the business or like knowing like your local situation, knowing the regulatory environment. I feel like 10, 20 years ago when we went from, I don't know, paper to HRISs, right? Or like on premise or like cloud based software. I don't think from an HR team perspective, you would put, hey, you really need to know how to do word processing versus writing it. Like, I don't think you put it at that same kind of tier in terms of like importance. But do you think this is like distinct in that it's like as much if you're going to be an HR professional in the future, like being AI literate is
Yeah.
like on that level with these other things, as opposed to previous, what we might previously say about technology? Because one way to look at this is, hey, it's the latest wave of technology. It's been shifting since the Industrial Revolution.
Sure.
And it's just, you always got to learn the new tool and get with the times.
No, I think that's exactly right. As I think about the entire AI conversation, I think it used to be the shiny new thing. Not that many years ago, it was the shiny new thing. Now, I think it's becoming imperative. And I think that those folks that let themselves fall behind, I think will not be as successful long term.
So then we've made a couple of things that arguably, a couple of assertions that arguably is like doom and gloom. CHROs aren't going to be like expanding HR headcount anytime soon. Maybe the market is such that everyone needs to do more with less. A CHRO is able to provide like more value themselves by using tools to do a training that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do in the past, which is all great. But if you're a college graduate or about to come out and are crazy enough to want to get into the function, right? New and upcoming, what thoughts would you have for them if it diverts at all from this doom and gloom summary I try to put in place?
I think that it is ripe with opportunity. I think that there are so many ways, I think, to embrace this technology. And yes, it's making our workplaces different. Sure, but that's okay. At the end of the day, I really believe there's always going to be a place for good people. If you're coming out of school or you're coming new into the profession, I think you get as experienced as you can, as quickly as you can, and do it with the right things that where the risk is low, right? As you continue to build your skill up. And some of this stuff, it's like the high diving board too, right? For me, I think that some of the stuff is you just jump in, right? And I think you have a lifeguard, that's great. And you go, right? And I think that's what I would say to someone who's coming in, that is not to be afraid of the impact of some of these things. The whole work construct, I think, will continue to evolve. And I think this is here to stay.
You're really painting a picture for me, Adam. Talking about the high diving board, followed shortly after talking about impact. And I'd prefer to start with the low diving board, even with the lifeguard in place there. And I would posit that's what college and side projects. There's so many ways to get those reps in if you're willing to like just go off and learn and try things on your own, whether you're getting into the workplace for the first time or you already are at a place and have a role, right? You could probably ask yourself literally anything that I find myself doing, can I make this more efficient? But if that's the case for like new grads, one other perspective I would love your thoughts on while I have you is, what about from a CHRO's perspective? It's a very different vantage point. There's sub functions that are like rolling, and there's all these processes, not to mention you're thinking about the executive team and the board and enablement of the entire organization. But personally, as a CHRO, or like when you go to these other like SURE meetings, like what are the things that you can advice you would have, or at least things that you do personally to feel like you're adapting and moving with the current and feel like you have a handle on things? Like, how
Yeah.
do you actually do that? What would you say you do tactically, day to day, week to week, along with everything else to feel like you're with it?
I keep trying. I think that's so important, right? I think that it would be easy
Yeah.
for someone to say, as you just did, that, okay, from where I sit, I don't need to know as much about the blah, blah, blah. And I think that's when a leader of any function, HR, finance, whatever, starts to lose a little bit of touch. And I think that I want to stay relevant just as much as I want my team to stay relevant. And so I think you make a great point that it's how I've become, in a fairly short order, I think become so comfortable with having it open and just using it throughout the day, just for little things, right? Larger things alike, right? And so I think it's challenging ourselves as much as we challenge our departments to adapt, and the business as a whole. And that's our job.
I love that. So look at the man in the mirror and then just keep trying. I love that message because it is easy to say there's a lot of other things to do, right? And maybe this is like someone else's job. But then if you are trying every day, that it tends to show up, right? To your team, to those around you, all stakeholders, and the message for the change that you're looking for in the organization. If it's embodied in what you're doing personally, that's just accelerates things. So thank you for this conversation. That's might be about all the time we have, but it's really fascinating to go talk about the current environment that we're in as a CHR and what you're seeing from a talent acquisition process, the promise and the perils, but ultimately got to try, got to keep going, got to try. And there will be roles and there will be jobs for good people, right? Just have the right mindset. I think that's a great optimistic note to end on. So thank you so much for this conversation, Adam. It's been fascinating. And for everyone out there who's following along, looking at ways to future proof their own organizations, their own HR functions. I think you may have found a couple of nuggets of insight and maybe a little push to go off and do a thing or two. And so thank you again, Adam, for this and signing off. See you guys in the next one. Bye, Adam.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Proof HR. If you like the discussion, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on the platform you're listening to or watching us on. Or share this with a friend or colleague who may find value in the message. See you next time as we keep our pulse on how we can all thrive in the age of AI. Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI-powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.